glad you're here. If you're watching online, glad that you're watching. They just told me just a moment ago we've got 86 or 87 kids checked in back there today on a summer Sunday when it's raining. So if you've got kids and you brought them, thanks for that. Also, don't forget Bible school tonight, 5:30. Love to see you back. It's good to be back this week. Last week I was down in Clinton County at one of our sister churches, Westview Christian. David is up at Mill Springs today, and then Miss Bailey is at Victory Christian in Lancaster. So we're sort of scattered out all over the place. Good to see the balcony crew there. There was one funny moment, though. Last Sunday, before I went to Clinton County, I came to the 9 a.m. service here, which was really good. And David was up here, and he was preaching his heart out. And about halfway through his message, I felt this little tug on my pant leg. And I looked down, and Cannon was sitting there, and he looked up and he said, "Daddy, do you preach as long as Davo?" Which I thought was a great question, you know. But the truth is, unfortunately, I tend to go a little bit longer than Davo. So if you have your Bible, Luke 16. I don't know what you do to relax during a normal week, but one of the things that I enjoy doing is watching movies. Now, for me, there's never been anything more relaxing than going to a theater and spending, $35 on a small popcorn and a Coke and to watch a movie. But in recent years, if you're a person who watches movies, you know the way that we watch movies has changed fairly dramatically. Today, more often than not, rather than getting in a car and driving to a movie theater and laying out big money, most of us walk to our living room, we sit in our favorite chair, we scroll through, we find something on demand that we think will capture our attention, and then we just sit there and watch it in the comfort of our own home. Now, if you're a person who does this, you know there's a lot of advantages to watching a movie at your house as opposed to going to a movie theater. For one thing, it's cheaper. It's a lot more comfortable, to sit in your own chair. You don't have to worry about anybody, being behind you and sneezing on you or talking through the movie or anything like that. The best part about it, if you have to go to the bathroom, you just hit the pause button, you go do your thing, you come back, and everybody's, you're right where the story left. You don't have to worry about trying to catch up or figure out what you missed or anything like that. As far as I'm concerned, there's only one drawback to watching a movie at home as opposed to going to a theater, and it's this: you don't get to see the previews. Now, when you go to a movie theater, before the feature film comes on that you watch the previews. There's 4 or 5 movies, and the way this works is they show what's called a movie trailer. They take 4 or 5 selected scenes from this unreleased movie, and the idea is they want you to watch these scenes in a way that captures your attention so that you'll want to see the movie when it comes out later. And the key for them is to give you part of the story without giving away the whole story in a way that makes you want to know the rest of the story. And I don't know how it works for you, but for me, normally, just within 10, 15, 20 seconds of watching a movie trailer, I know whether or not I'm interested in seeing the movie. There's some that come on and you think, man, I can't wait to see this. So, you write down the date and it's coming out next summer or Christmas or later this fall, and you're really excited about it. Others of them come on, though, and you see the preview and you think, there is no way that I'm ever going to watch that movie. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. So you're going to avoid that in the future. There are some movies that draw you in and some that push you away. For the last few weeks, as a church family, we've been going through this series that we're calling Next, in which we're talking about some things that happen when a person dies. What comes next? What happens when your earthly life comes to an end? What happens then? As we've said all along, what the biblical writers give you when you read through the New Testament is not the whole movie. There are some questions that do not get answered when you read the Bible about what comes next. But what they do give you is a series of selected scenes. They give you a movie trailer that's meant to let you know whether or not you're interested in experiencing the rest of that movie. You see a great example of this in Luke 16. If you have your Bible open or your phone there, what we're going to talk about today is admittedly a little bit uncomfortable. For a lot of people, this is a topic that has almost disappeared, from conversation. Even in recent years, there's been a lot of well-known preachers and Bible scholars who have begun to question whether or not hell even exists. And yet when you look at the New Testament, it becomes clear that this is an unavoidable subject. And even myself, I put this off as long as I could going through this series, but we have to deal with it. And while we don't like to talk about it in our culture, Jesus talked about it a lot. If you go back and read through the New Testament, there are 1,870 verses that quote Jesus. Of those verses, 15% of them deal with the topic of judgment and hell. 2/3 of the parables that Jesus told deal with the same topic. And here's something that might surprise you. Jesus talked about hell twice as much as he talked about heaven. So in our culture, while there's a lot of debate about it, in the Bible, there's none. If you read what Jesus said, it's pretty clear what he believed about hell. You get to Luke 16, Jesus tells a story about two guys who both die. They wind up in dramatically different places. One guy goes to paradise, which is a form of heaven, while the other guy goes to a form of prison called Hades. Your translation might even refer to it as hell. And keep in mind, as we go through this, this is not the full picture. This is not the whole movie, but it is a preview. So make sure you understand, Jesus doesn't give us the whole story, but he gives us enough of the story to know that this is a place that we want to avoid at all costs. Now, before we jump into this, I want to be clear with you. Over the next few minutes, I have no intention of yelling at you. I'm not going to get red-faced. I'm not going to pull my shirt off and, throw my Bible and kick this stand over. I'm not going to do it. I know some of you had experiences in the past where some preacher stood up and they started talking about this, and boy, they got really angry. And some guys even act like they're excited about it. You know what I mean? Like, hey, everybody's going to hell and we're celebrating. No, we're not going to do that today. I've got a church sign that I want to show you that I saw recently. Do you know what hell is? Come hear our preacher. Well, I'm not going to do that today, and I hope that the next few minutes are not like that for you. Luke 16, verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, not the same Lazarus that Jesus raised from the dead, who was covered with sores. And longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table, even the dogs came and licked his sores. So here you go, right from the start, Jesus is contrasting the lifestyles of these two guys. The first guy he mentions is known simply as the rich man. And in that culture, to be dressed in purple linen was not just a symbol that somebody was wealthy, but that they were ultra wealthy. This guy was crazy wealthy. He lived in a mansion, custom made, best of everything. Every meal was like a 5-star buffet. Beach house, private jet, exotic vacations. I mean, this guy is the elite. He's in the top of the top 1% of the top 1%. But at the end of his long driveway, sitting just outside his gate with nothing, is a guy named Lazarus. Now, something interesting, this is the only parable in the Bible where Jesus actually names one of the people. That's led some people to think that maybe what Jesus is telling here is not just a story, but quite possibly a true story. But anyway you want to read this, here's this guy who sits out there. He's got no home, no source of income, no health care. There's nobody looking out for him. The only food he has are the crumbs that fall from the rich man's table. That's the Bible's way of saying that at the end of every day, when they put the leftover food in the dumpster, this guy would go and dive into the dumpster and find whatever he could, and that would be his meal for the day. So here are these two guys, and even though they live on the same property, they live worlds apart. One guy's ultra wealthy, one guy has nothing. Then you get to verse 22, and something happens that happens to everybody eventually. They both die. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. Now here's Lazarus. By all accounts, his life's been really hard, but then he dies and he goes immediately to a place the Bible calls Abraham's side. Your translation might say Abraham's bosom. It's just another word for paradise or heaven. Paul said to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. So this guy takes his last breath on earth and he's immediately ushered into God's presence. But as Jesus tells this story, Lazarus is not the only one that dies. The rich man also dies. Now, considering his background, it's very likely the guy probably had a big funeral, community leader, a businessman, people lined up to pay their respects. There were flowers and probably the most expensive casket you could get. If people, strolled by the casket, somebody stood up and said a few words about what a great guy he was. And probably a long line of people who showed up to pay their respects. But at this point in the story, it takes a dramatic turn. Jesus includes a plot twist that nobody would have seen coming. In that time period, it was automatically assumed that if somebody was wealthy, that they were blessed by God. And the opposite of that was also considered to be true. If somebody was poor, they must be being punished by God. But Jesus turns that up on his head because he said, as soon as these guys die, the rich man, rather than going to be in God's presence, he goes to a place of suffering, while the poor guy goes to be in God's presence. Check out verse 23. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue because I'm in agony in this fire. Now again, remember, this is not the whole movie. This is not the complete picture, but it is a preview. As you go through this, there are 4 or 5 phrases that you can use to describe what hell's going to be like. You can follow along on your outline or in the app. Here's the first one. Hell will be a place of eternal punishment. Now, I know we don't like to think about that. We certainly don't like to talk about that, but verse 23 makes it clear that the rich man found himself living in torment. The Greek word there is a word that means continual suffering. In the ancient world, the same phrase was used to describe a place where criminals were taken and literally tortured as a form of punishment. If you think that's bad, it gets worse. Over and over again in the New Testament, there's a specific term that Jesus uses to describe hell, and it's the word Gehenna. It's a Greek word. One of the things that Jesus was really good at was using these images, these objects, these things that everybody was already familiar with to teach them truth. So when somebody comes to Jesus, they say, hey, Jesus, what is hell going to be like? He says, it's going to be like this place that you already know about called Gehenna. Gehenna was the garbage dump for the city of Jerusalem. In Jesus' day, it was outside the city wall on the southwest corner of Jerusalem. Back in the Old Testament, it had been a place where idols were worshipped, and because of that, it was a place where hundreds, if not thousands, of children had been sacrificed to this pagan god named Moloch. By the time you get to the New Testament, though, it had evolved into this combination of a garbage dump and incinerator. It was a place where the bodies of dead animals were thrown. It was a place where the bodies of criminals were disposed of. Because of that, it was a place that was known for the horrific smells that emanated from there. 24/7, the flames were visible because they were always burning the trash in order to make room for the next load of trash that would come in. It was the ultimate symbol of ruin and destruction. And when somebody comes to Jesus, they say, Jesus, what is hell going to be like? He says, you go out there and look at that garbage dump, and that's a pretty good picture. It's not the whole story, but it's a preview. I want you to listen to some of these other phrases that Jesus used to describe hell. Matthew 13, he says it's a place where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Later on, he called it a place where the worm does not die and the fire does not go out. Revelation is called a place of no rest. It's a place of outer darkness. It's compared to a lake of burning sulfur, but most of all, it's described as a place of eternal punishment. And some people hear all that and they say, well, that's just symbolic, and there's probably some truth to that. But again, the biblical writers, they're trying to use human language to describe something that's indescribable. And just like you can be sure that heaven is going to be infinitely better than the words used to describe it, you can also be sure that hell will be infinitely worse than the words used to describe it. Jesus makes it clear that hell is a place of punishment. It's a place where justice will be served. Now, if you're like me, there's a part of you that likes that. I mean, when you live in a world like we do and there's so much injustice, there's a part of you that really looks forward to that. Most of the time we think of hell, we think of Hitler and Stalin and child molesters and human traffickers and drug dealers and murderers, and there's a small part of us that's happy that one day in the future, God's going to take care of all that. The scary part, though, is that Jesus also makes it clear that hell is a place of justice, but it's not just a place of justice for terrible people who did unspeakable things. It's also the default destination of every person who dies apart from Christ. And that should be the part that gets your attention. That's the part that scares me. Here's the deal. You don't have to do anything to go to hell. Most of us, if we're not, apart from Christ, are already headed there. C.S. Lewis said it like this. He said, "The safest road to hell is the gradual one. The gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts." In other words, most people, you don't have to look and figure out how you're going to make it to hell. For most people, that path is not hard to find. It's the path that they're already on, unless there's a change. Here's the second thing we know about hell. It'll be a place of complete separation. You read this story, one of the things that's interesting about this and that nobody can really explain is that the rich man seems to be able to see Father Abraham and this beggar, Lazarus, where they are, from where he is in hell. Now, how all that works, I have no idea. But the point is, the rich man is completely aware that he's been separated from them. They're one place, and he's in another place. And over again, it's that theme of separation that Jesus talks about. The best example, the story he tells, we call it the parable of the sheep and the goats. And he tells this story. Here's what he says. He says he's going to come back, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He'll put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. So he goes through and he says, depending on whether or not a person had a relationship with Jesus, you go here and you go here if you didn't. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. And then I want you to listen to how Jesus closes this parable. Here's what he says. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Now, as hard as that is to hear, Jesus makes it clear that when it's all said and done, there's going to be this moment when people are separated from one another depending on whether or not they had a relationship with Jesus. Now, in our world, we don't like to think about that. We don't even like to talk about that. In our world, we like to pretend as if everybody goes to heaven. In fact, there are some people, and you know it's true, there's some people that really think that all you have to do to go to heaven is die. And it's just sort of automatic. But if you believe what Jesus said, it's not true. Not only will we be separated from one another, Jesus also says that those in hell will be separated from God himself. One of the phrases that Jesus used to describe hell, he said it'd be a place of outer darkness. Now here's why that's important. The Apostle John, 1 John chapter 1 says that God is light. So if God is light and you're in a place of outer darkness, that means that you've been cut off from his presence. You're separated not just from people who knew Jesus, you're separated from God himself. So you think about it like this. If God is the source of everything good, and the Bible says that he is, then try and imagine what it would be like to spend eternity in a place where there's nothing good. I was reading some this week and I saw where one writer referenced hell as the land of no more good. A couple weeks ago, on Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting down in my office and I was studying and preparing for this message. I had the books piled up and legal pads everywhere and my Bible was up. I was trying to figure out how do you communicate this because nobody likes to talk about this. I don't like to talk about this, but yet it's necessary. So I was trying to figure this out, and there was this sound that I kept hearing. And at first, I thought, I'm going crazy. You ever had that? You hear something, you think, I'm losing it. And then it disappeared, and a few minutes later, I heard it again, and then it got louder, and then this went on for like 10 minutes. I thought, I'm losing it. I've sat here so long. I've studied this stuff. I've finally gone crazy. Finally, I couldn't escape it. It sounded like a little kid laughing. And then it would go away. Then a few minutes later, I heard, and it's two little kids laughing. And I thought, this is nuts. So I finally had enough. I got up, and I walked outside my office, and there was Anita and her 5 kids talking to the secretary. Now, if you know Anita runs our kids ministry. She's got all those, kids back there today. She's got 5 kids of her own. So whenever they go somewhere, like the attendance goes up 10% wherever they go. It's incredible. So there they are, and there's one or two of her kids. They're talking about something, and they're laughing. And I quickly corrected them and told them, hey, this is a church. This is no place for laughter. You guys know I didn't say that. But I went back in my office, and that's when it hit me. In hell, there won't be any laughter. There won't be anything to laugh about. Be no joy, no peace, no beauty, no friendships, no hope, and nothing to look forward to. Here's the third thing. Hell's a place where there will be no escape. I have a picture I'm going to show you. This is a place that you may have heard me talk about before. It's called ADX Florence. It's advertised as the most secure prison on earth. Inside its walls is kind of the worst of the worst. The Unabomber's there, several terrorist leaders. The young man who bombed the Boston Marathon a few years ago, he's there. From the beginning, this prison was intentionally designed to be escape-proof. By design, the prisoners cannot see the sky from any location inside the prison. They spend 23.5 hours a day completely locked down, completely isolated in a 7 by 12 foot concrete cell. At no point are they allowed to have any contact at all with other prisoners, and almost very little contact with the guards. Everywhere you look, there's security cameras, motion detectors, armed guards, laser beams, pressure pads, attack dogs, and razor wire fencing. Since its opening in 1994, no one's been able to escape. One former warden described it like this. He said, it's basically a cleaner version of hell. As soon as the new prisoners come through the door, you can see it in their faces. That's when it hits you. 1 minute you're looking at the beauty of the Rocky Mountains and the backdrop. When you get inside, you realize that's the last time you'll ever see it. He ended with this. He said, the Supermax prison is life after death. And in my opinion, it's far worse than death. Imagine entering a prison where you knew you'd never get out. And then listen to what Jesus says in verse 25. But Abraham replied, Son, you remember that in your lifetime you received your good things while Lazarus received bad things. But now he's comforted here and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. Now for the rich man, he realizes there's this chasm. I'm one place, they're a different place, and there's no crossing over. That's Jesus' way of letting us know that hell will be a place where there's no chance of escape. Here's a fourth thing. Hell will be a place of deep regret. You keep reading the story, and you realize that the rich man immediately asked Abraham to send Lazarus back to his five brothers. He has some regrets about the way things have gone down. He wants Lazarus to go and warn his brothers. Check out verse 27. He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them so that they will not also come to this place of torment. And Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they'll repent. Now for the rich man, looking back from the perspective of eternity, he's got some regrets. Some things he's done, some things he said, maybe some actions he took. You know, he's building his empire. He ran over some people. He told some lies. He cut some corners. And from the perspective of eternity, he regrets that and he wishes he could undo it. We've all been there. We've all got things we wish we could undo. But you know, for most people, the biggest regrets are not the things they did that they wish they hadn't done. It's the things they didn't do that they wish they had. Bronnie Ware is a nurse in Australia. She spent most of her career working in the field of palliative care, meaning the people she worked with were within the last 12 weeks of their lives. And during her years working in that field, she began to interview folks about their biggest regrets. And she found that there's something about, inching closer to the finish line that enables people to speak the unfiltered truth. And a couple years ago in a TED Talk, she talked about how through these hundreds of these conversations, she was able to narrow it down to the top 5 regrets that most people have. Here's number 1 on the list. Most people said, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself not the life others expected of me. Number 2 on the list, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Number 3, I wish I'd had the courage to express my real feelings. Number 4, I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. And then number 5 was I wish I'd let myself be happier. Now you go through the list, if you listen to a TED Talk, you can sort of understand where most people are coming from. I mean, you can probably relate to most of those, but I was watching that a couple weeks ago and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be cool, like if instead of talking to people who were dying, you could somehow interview people who had already died? I mean, wouldn't it be cool, like if instead of talking to people who are moving closer to death, you were able to ask the same question of people who had already crossed over, and you said, hey, now that you've died, now that you're in eternity, what's your greatest regret? Now, we can't do that, but I got a feeling if you could sit down and talk to this guy that Jesus talks about, and you asked him, what's your greatest regret? It wouldn't be, I worked too hard. It wouldn't be that, I wish I'd been true to myself. You know what I think it would be? I wish I'd had a relationship with God. And I'm pretty sure his second biggest regret, if you read the story, is that I wish I'd have helped the people closest to me have a relationship with God. That brings me to the last thing. Now, admittedly, this has been a pretty ugly picture, but the last thing's by far the most important thing. It's a place that's completely avoidable. At the end of this story, there's this incredible exchange that takes place between the rich man who's in hell and Father Abraham, where the rich man begs Abraham to send Lazarus back to warn his brothers. Then you get to verse 31, and Jesus makes a statement that's proven to be true. I want you to listen to what he says. He said to him, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets and the Sunday school teachers and grandma and grandpa and the people who witnessed and the people who told them the truth and the biblical writers who wrote down the story, if they don't listen to them, they will not be convinced even if someone rises from the dead. One of the questions you sometimes encounter whenever you talk about this, and you've probably thought about this, I've been asked this a lot, is how could a loving God ever send a person to hell? Maybe you've thought about that. And the truth is that God doesn't send anybody to hell. He's already done everything that he could possibly do to keep us from going there. I want you to listen close to these words from C.S. Lewis. Here's what he said. In the long run, the answer to all those who object to the doctrine of hell is itself a question. What are you asking God to do? To wipe out their past sins and at all costs to give them a fresh start, smoothing every difficulty and offering miraculous help? But he's done so on Calvary. To forgive them, they will not be forgiven. To leave them alone, alas, I'm afraid that is what he does. And listen to this part. The damned are, in one sense, successful, rebels to the end. The doors of hell are locked on the inside. They enjoy forever the horrible freedom they have demanded and are therefore self-enslaved. The line I want you to catch there is where he says the doors of hell are locked on the inside. Whenever you ask the question, how could a loving God send anybody to hell, you're asking the wrong question. The right question is, how could any person say no to a loving God? Because here's the deal. As I said going in this, I didn't give you a complete picture of hell because I can't and I don't want to. I don't want to see the rest of the movie. The preview is more than enough for me. So if you're sitting here this morning and you're not sure whether you would go to heaven if you died, or if for some reason you're waiting on God to do something, to invite you to be in a relationship with him, I want you to know he's already done it. He's already done it. He sent his son to die in your place to pay the penalty for your sins so that you could avoid all this, and even more so that you could spend eternity with him. He's done everything he possibly can to invite you to be adopted into his family. See, C.S. Lewis said, the door to hell is locked from the inside. And there's another door that's locked from the inside, and that's the door to your heart. If you look at this painting above me at the top of the ceiling behind me, you'll notice Jesus standing there, and he's knocking on that door. And it's interesting, if you look at that door, there's no door handle. That's a door that has to be opened from the inside. And here's the deal. Jesus is never going to kick the door, and he's not the SWAT team. He's not going to break the windows out and come in with guns a-blazing and force you to do something. He's never going to do that, but he will stand at the door and knock. But make sure you understand, there's nothing in the Bible that says he has to stand out there and knock forever. Make sure you understand that. There's nothing that says he's going to stand there for the rest of your life and knock. He might, but he might not. If you're here this morning and you feel like God is knocking on the door of your heart, and you want to talk to somebody, you want to pray with somebody, I'll be here. And I don't want to scare you. I'm not going to yell at you. I promised you I wouldn't. But if that's you, you need to ask yourself, what on earth am I waiting for? Because I don't know about you, there's some movies that I don't need to see. There's some movies where the preview is plenty. And for me, this is one of them. I want you to stand. We're going to have a brief invitation. If you're here, you want to talk to somebody, you want to pray with somebody, just meet me on this front row.